Requiem is clever. I generally think that the developers have cracked the formula for balancing horror and action in an action horror game. As someone who's never really played a Resident Evil game before, I can tell you that the gameplay loop between Leon and Grace is arguably the most addicting part of this particular game. Going in, I honestly did not have any expectations. Games in these genres usually win me over using the story, and for the longest time, that was the most important part of a single player game, which is to have a strong narrative, compelling characters, and a story that really stays with you long after you've put the controller down. So if that's the kind of experience you're looking for, you probably won't find it here. So when I say that I had no expectations going in, I was kind of preparing myself for disappointment on the story front. But despite that, I can confidently say that I would have been disappointed in myself, honestly, if I had skipped this game. So we begin the game as Grace, investigating a series of murders at the Renwood Hotel. And with the game lasting only around 8 to 10 hours on my first playthrough, Requiem really wastes no time throwing you straight into the horror. And here's when we encounter the first horror set piece, and it's really the first of many unique and memorable sections. And this beginning section sets it up perfectly. Placing Grace in the middle of the bustling city sidewalk grounds Grace. It shows us that she isn't special, and it gives us the feeling that we're utterly unprepared for what's to come. This is really how Requiem delivers its horror, not through jump scares, although that isn't absent in this game, but through dread. There's an atmosphere they have created here that is very unsettling, and it's really a sneak peek into how horror is done in the later sections of the game. But just as we have sweated through our t-shirts, surviving this opening section, the game suddenly shifts perspective and we're thrown into Leon's viewpoint. And this is when the game really hands you all the tools you need to live out your power fantasy in this action horror game. And to me, this is the hook of Requiem. Grace's sections are slower, tenser, and genuinely sweat-inducing, but Leon's sections on the other hand are all about the action. So just as the horror in Grace's section felt really intense, the gunplay in Leon's section feels just as punchy and satisfying. And a lot of this comes down to sound design, animations, and the overall attention to detail to combat in this game. And Leon's sections are where you notice this the most, and honestly, considering the amount of work that clearly went into gunplay, I would say it's almost a waste to not experience it in first person. So on that topic, let's talk about perspective. This game lets you switch between first person and third person when playing as both Leon and Grace, and I think this actually affects the gameplay experience quite a bit. So when playing as Grace in third person, at least in my opinion, it made the horror feel less immersive. Being able to, let's say, peek around a corner removes a lot of that tension that playing in first person creates. And not being able to look behind you as you are running away from the infected is partly why Grace's sections are so tense. It's really the sense of unknown, and playing third person I feel like kind of undercuts that tension. But now if you look at Leon, there really isn't any trade-offs when playing in first person, as the game still kicks you into third person for those animated takedowns, so they are equally as satisfying. So for my first playthrough, I really just stuck with first person the entire time, as both Leon and Grace, but ultimately this will be something that you'll have to decide for yourself. Leon's sections are quite literally the perfect counterbalance to Grace's section, and with a bit of minor spoilers for the early part of the game, we are actually able to retrace the hospital section as Leon after we've played it as Grace. But remember, just minutes earlier, we were sneaking through the same corridors as Grace, and depending on the resources we had and the enemies that were in front of us, we're quite limited to where we could actually go. We were the ones being hunted, but when we return as Leon, everything changes. Suddenly, we have the freedom to decide where we want to go, and it's really funny how a shotgun and an axe will change your attitude And that's exactly what makes this gameplay so addictive. When we're playing as Grace, the horror makes you crave the moment you get to play as Leon again, but the action that you experience as Leon is only satisfying because of how vulnerable we felt when playing as Grace. This back and forth is what keeps this gameplay loop constantly engaging, and the level and the puzzles that are in this game help a lot as well. Many of the puzzles can technically be simplified into these fetch quests, but each level introduces something new that really keeps it fresh, and because of that, the puzzles really become tedious. There are occasions where the game almost crosses that line into tediousness, but I feel like the developers are really aware of that, and whenever things risk becoming too repetitive, the game tends to throw us a bone and move on to the next exciting piece.
Keep moving.
Oh, who's that? Oh, I'm so sorry about the power outage.
Leon sections, on the other hand, really don't get too complicated. It feels like the developer's goal here is to just simply deliver a straightforward run and gun fun. It's a simple goal, but one that I would say they have achieved here. And look, the game isn't difficult by any means, but the game also doesn't leave too much room here for skill expression. There is a parry mechanic when playing as Leon, but ultimately, the game's intention is to just place you into these action movie style set pieces and give you the variety of weapons you need to just let loose. I want to show you these set pieces here because they're definitely moments you should experience for yourself. If we're looking at the graphics of Requiem, simply put, it just looks fantastic. Playing on the highest setting with ray tracing enabled, the game looks phenomenal. The developers are clearly not shy about showing off the visual fidelity of this game. If we look at these enclosed areas, you can really see just how detailed these textures are, and paired with ray tracing, the ambience and atmosphere created here is really next to none, and it really only emphasizes the horror even more. The larger, more open areas, on the other hand, really highlights how well these visuals can be scaled across the bigger scenes. And I think what is important is how these distant objects are being shadowed here, which really gives the impression of detail at a distance. There's also a path tracing mode that looks even better, especially in Grace's section where there are usually only a few light sources lighting the entire room. And here's where you can see how path trace light is used to great effect. Just take a look at how this single red light is being diffused across this entire dark hallway. In terms of performance, I played this on PC running in RTX 4080, and I just gotta say, it's excellent. I ran this with DLSS set on performance just to take advantage of the higher refresh rate monitor, but if you're aiming for 60, that shouldn't be a problem. This game is very well optimized across mid-range graphics cards. However, whilst I didn't run into any crashes during my 10 or so hours with this game, I did encounter this one visual bug where parts of my screen would occasionally become extremely bright. It looked like a ray tracing error, and I'm not sure this would have been patched by the time you're watching this. It did break immersion at times, but I wouldn't say this is severe enough to ruin your entire experience with this game. The voice acting across the board is very strong, and what stands out the most is how voice work is integrated into the gameplay, especially with our protagonist Grace. Her breathing and her reaction during tense moments really help reinforce the emotions the developers wants to instill in us. And importantly, it never feels overused. These kinds of effects can easily become immersion breaking if overdone, but here they're used with restraint, and only in key moments, which I like a lot. Leon, on the other hand, seems to exist partly as a one-liner machine, and even in moments where it feels slightly out of place, he almost always has a line ready, and because of that, it sometimes feels like the game itself isn't taking these story beats quite too seriously. And at some point, I started expecting a one-liner whenever something dramatic happened, and at times I was pleasantly surprised when it was absent. So you might have deduced from the title of this video that the story really isn't that important, because early on it becomes clear that this game isn't trying to deliver an emotional narrative. Its focus is on gameplay, and that isn't a problem, just as long as the gameplay is done very well. And in this case, it is. And if you can accept that, the game becomes incredibly enjoyable. Look, that's not to say that this entire story is a write-off. The story is serviceable, but importantly, it never gets in the way of the gameplay. And because of that, I feel like the lighter story was never really the drawback of this game. With all that said, I can confidently recommend this game to new players and existing fans of the series. And to be honest, throughout my 10 or so hours, I never felt like I was missing important context. And I never felt like my enjoyment was dependent on recognizing references from the previous game. So if you're like me, someone who hasn't played any of the previous games, please don't feel like that is a barrier to entry. So, have you played it? What do you think of it? Drop a comment below. And I'll see you in the next one.
Oh, I miss our Raccoon City hospitality.